China flexes its military might around Taiwan just one day after its aircraft carrier, the Shandong, sailed south of the country. Tackling a monster fugitive problem. Thousands of wanted people have skipped the country, while police say they're not to blame. And on the eve of Taiwan Pride, we look at why the country is the exception, not the rule, when it comes to LGBTQ rights in Asia. Plus,
some of Taiwan's most fascinating historic buildings are located right here in the old capital of Tainan. We'll show you how some of them, like this old department store, are getting a new lease on life.
Hello and welcome. I'm Rik Glauert, and thanks for joining us this evening on TaiwanPlus News. Taiwan's military spotted 35 Chinese warplanes and 15 Navy ships around the country in the last 24 hours. China regularly conducts exercises near Taiwan as a way to test the country's defenses. 23 of those planes entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. Now, this zone does not belong to Taiwan, but it is used by the military here for defensive purposes. 16 fighter jets, 3 recon planes, and a helicopter entered the zone. 2 drones were also spotted in the ADIZ, with one circling the main island of Taiwan. This comes one day after Taiwan's military reported that one of China's aircraft carriers, the Shandong, had passed through the Bashi Channel near the Philippines on its way to the Western Pacific. Taiwan's military says it has deployed missile defense systems and is monitoring the situation. For more on China's military activity around Taiwan, our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Ben Lewis, an independent defense analyst based in Washington, D.C.
What is significant about the latest incursion around Taiwan?
Well, it's interesting. We had our 5th circumnavigation flight by PLA unmanned aerial vehicle around Taiwan, going back to a few months ago when they first started. And it's similar to what we've seen before, but they're very uncommon as these kinds of activities go. And so this is the largest single day total so far in October. And in addition to that, we had this 5th circumnavigation. So definitely a large-scale training exercise. I think a number of things. I think first and foremost, most likely they're trying to collect intelligence about something on the east side of Taiwan that they normally can't see as well because of this geography. And second, I think, kind of with all PLA activity around Taiwan, the goal is normalization. This is the 5th time they've done it. I'm sure there are going to be more in the future. So I wouldn't be surprised if, in the next month or so, we have another one of these, and if they become more frequent over time. And then, of course, obviously, they need to practice having a presence on the east side of Taiwan.
Last time we saw China's aircraft carrier, the Shandong, go towards the Pacific, we saw one of the largest unannounced drills from China. Is this a potential second round of these drills?
It's a little too early to say. I think it's definitely possible. When the MND put out its early report on ADA's activity, that actually was released before they were talked about the Shandong transiting the Bashi Channel. So I think that it's definitely possible. It's a little too early to call, but as we saw in September, the PLA undertook its largest ever carrier exercises in the Western Pacific, and they never announced it publicly. So given the political considerations, the election obviously is in January. They don't want to be accused of election interference. I think it's possible, if not likely, that they're not going to announce if they're doing another large-scale drill again. I think, one of the considerations that has to be made about this time of year specifically and PLA activities is that this is good weather. So they have to practice when the weather is good, or else they're not going to be able to practice, and they need the practice. But as we get closer to January, weather notwithstanding, I think, Beijing has learned the hard way in the past that attempting to intimidate Taiwanese voters really doesn't go their way.
That was defense analyst Ben Lewis speaking to our reporter Jaime Ocon. Meanwhile, U.S. lawmakers have been questioning the Navy over what they say are alarming delays in sending weapons to Taiwan. In a letter to the Navy Secretary, they asked why weapons production sometimes languishes for months or even years after purchasing deals are signed. Chair of the House of Representatives Select Committee on China, Mike Gallagher, said in the letter that time is running out to deter military action by China toward Taiwan. About $20 billion worth of weapons and military equipment sold to Taiwan is delayed. The president of one of Taiwan's few remaining diplomatic allies, Naru, has been removed from office. In a Facebook post, Naru's government announced that Russ Kuhn has been ousted in a vote of no confidence by parliament. 2 candidates were up to replace him, but neither won enough votes. Naru's parliament is now in recess until next Monday. Kuhn ran unopposed in the 2022 presidential election. He recently visited Taiwan to take part in National Day celebrations. Taiwan's foreign ministry says it is closely watching the situation in Nauru, but says that bilateral ties are stable. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council has offered its condolences after China's former premier and Xi Jinping's longtime number 2, Li Keqiang, died of a heart attack. Our reporter Ed Moon looks back on his life and his legacy.
Waving to the public one last time. Former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, seen here in September at a religious site in northern China, his last known appearance just weeks before his death at the age of 68 was announced.
中国共产党第17届、18届、19届中央政治局常委、国务院原总理李克强同志近日在上海休息。2023年10月26日因突发心脏病，经全力抢救无效，于10月27日0时10分在上海逝世。
Li was number 2 under Chinese President Xi Jinping for a decade, leading the country's civil service and overseeing China's economic development. But he became an increasingly peripheral figure as Xi tightened his control over the country. He was removed from the Communist Party's top decision-making body, the Politburo, last year and stepped down as premier in March. On the streets of Beijing, shock at his sudden death.
李克强在总理呢，他是我们在经济界贡献挺大的，对我们国家呢，他的去世也是一大损失。
就是他真的就是陪伴了我们一代人的一个成长，在我的心里是这样。然后就是刚刚来这里，突然听到你们说这个消息，我就是真的就脑子里就是空白了，就是很难过。
The son of a local official, Li was born in eastern China in 1955. After joining the Communist Party, he worked his way up to the rank of provincial leader. He was tipped by many for the top job when the Communist Party chose a new leadership team in 2012, but lost out to Xi Jinping. As premier, he gained a reputation as a man of the people.
He is quite approaching and accessible to general public and show his concern to anything which complained by the general public. So his popularity is actually pretty high.
But Li was best known for his commitment to economic reform, principles that were severely tested during the COVID-19 pandemic, as Beijing's strict zero-COVID policy choked the Chinese economy. Li's death comes at a difficult time for Beijing. The economy, which he helped steer for so many years, is slowing, and there's been growing dissatisfaction among the public.
There's a lot of people just talking about internal conflict or internal struggle will follow after his death. I don't think that will be the case. Then he has very smoothly and successfully phased out from the Chinese politics in this March. Now, after that, he never make any public comments or try to show his political attitude or try to support anything or disagree anything.
When Li stepped down in March, few would have expected news of his death just 7 months later. The passing of this popular leader could be the latest challenge facing Xi Jinping's China. Luffy Li and Ed Moon for TaiwanPlus.
China's top diplomat says Beijing and Washington need in-depth dialogue to reduce misunderstandings and to get frosty relations back on track. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang is in Washington, where he met with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He may also meet with President Joe Biden. Wang says the two nations have disagreements, but also share common interests. Their relationship has deteriorated in recent years over issues including Taiwan. During Wang's visit, the two sides are expected to discuss China's aggressive actions in the South China Sea, as well as the Israeli-Hamas conflict. For more on what pressure China could bring to bear in the Middle East, TaiwanPlus reporter Louise Watt spoke to Dan Perry, an international affairs commentator based in Tel Aviv.
China's top diplomat is in Washington for talks with officials, and they're hoping that China can use its influence with Iran and the region as a whole to halt the conflict or to rein it in. But how much influence does China have in the Middle East, do you think?
I think to the extent that China can do something the US and Europe cannot,
it may be with influence on Iran, as you just alluded. The U.S. and the West don't have a history of successfully nudging Iran to go where they want it to go. Perhaps the more important player right now in the Middle East in this conflict is Qatar. Because if I can think of one player that truly can influence what happens in Gaza, the future of Hamas, it would be Qatar, that provides funding for sanctuary to, and in general, support regarding Hamas. Both Qatar and Iran certainly have leverage on Hamas, and I think that is the pivot point, because I cannot see that much to be done with Israel. I mean, Israel, in the wake of the massacre of 1,400 people, at a level of butchery that is almost unimaginable, has kind of decided that they no longer are prepared to tolerate Hamas being in power in Gaza. That is different from previous circumstances where negotiators might have stepped in. So, you know what? China can help if they come up with a really brilliant idea. Right now, no one has.
How is China viewed in the Middle East?
China is viewed as a country that has tremendous resources that it can bring to bear, and an obvious interest in expanding its influence around the world. So yes, if China were able to help, I think there would be a considerable degree of willingness, also on the part of Israel, that has grown closer to China in recent years, to allow China to help. But as said, I, at the moment, don't much see what they can do other than, in the long term, to initiate major investments, in particular in the Palestinian territories, not just Gaza, but the West Bank as well, that might move the needle on politics in Palestine, and bring pressure to bear, in particular, I think, on Qatar more than Iran.
That was Dan Perry, an international affairs commentator, talking with Louise Wang. Israel is continuing its bombardment of Gaza after carrying out a raid on the territory ahead of an expected ground invasion. Israel's military released footage showing tanks, armored cars, and a bulldozer operating inside Gaza. The military says it attacked multiple Hamas targets before withdrawing, and that this raid was in preparation for the next stages of combat. Gaza's health ministry, run by Hamas, says more than 7,000 people have been killed since Israel began bombarding the territory. The offensive began after Hamas militants launched an attack on Israel on October 7th, killing at least 1,400 people and taking hundreds hostage. Taiwan's capital will hold its annual Pride Parade this weekend, Asia's largest LGBTQ event. Rik Glauert takes a look at the region's fight for equal marriage rights.
Tears of joy on the streets of Taipei in 2019, as Taiwan became the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage.
Taiwan's legalization of same-sex marriage in 2019 was a watershed moment for the entire Asia. It served not only as an affirmation for the LGBTIQ community in Taiwan, but it also sets a precedent for other Asian countries.
But since then, no other nation in Asia has followed suit. Of the 34 countries around the world that recognize same-sex marriage, Taiwan is an outlier in this region. Across Asia, all other LGBTQ communities are still fighting for that equality and recognition. Activists from Nepal to the Philippines and South Korea are working to raise awareness, taking cases to court, and advocating changes in the law, with varying degrees of success.
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think certain ways, certain things is moving ahead, but in certain ways we're also moving backward.
In India, Asia's largest democracy, the top court threw out a case asking them to recognize same-sex unions, saying it was up to legislators to change marriage laws. But just last month in Hong Kong, a partial win for the community. The Court of Final Appeal said that the city government must find a way to recognize same-sex partnerships. While in Nepal earlier this year, a judicial order was issued to make same-sex marriage legal, but so far, same-sex couples there have been unable to wed.
I think that the state of LGBTIQ rights across Asia would be diverse and dynamic. We might be one of the largest, most diverse continent, but we are also one of the most divisive. And this is because we have multiple cultures, traditions, and religions, each contributing to its unique stance on LGBTIQ issues.
These differing traditions and conservative cultures mean that each LGBTQ community in Asia faces their own challenges as they push for marriage rights. But as slow progress is made across the region, People are gathering in Taipei for Asia's largest Pride event, and there is also solidarity in the battle for equality. Wang and Rik Glauert for TaiwanPlus.
Coming after the break, we take a look at a controversial sports dome that's set to start trial runs next month. Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
we make the news.
Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Police in Thailand have extradited 2 convicted criminals to Taiwan. They're among about 8,000 people still at large overseas. John Van Triest has this report.
At Taiwan's largest airport, this scammer is back in custody. He and this man, sentenced for drugging and assaulting women, are behind bars after extradition from Thailand. It's an example of successful international police cooperation. But it's a small dent in a big problem. Around 7,800 people wanted in Taiwan have fled abroad, slipping past police and immigration. Taiwan's police force says it's not to blame.
护照注销这一块是外交部理事事务局是属于比较被动，是需要我们检警用韩文的方式。
One problem is the speed of the justice system. There's often a 1-month gap between the time a person is sentenced and the time they go to jail.
犯嫌利用侦审的一个空窗期，甚至持这个合法的旅行文件、护照出境，国内法务部还有高检署、外交部等相关单位，能针对国内的部分来做强化。
All this isn't news to officials, some of whom have offered solutions.
刑事诉讼法像一些这个有罪羁押制度啦，或者执行中该如何迅速执行，这个。很多草案都出来了，可是在立法院就一直没有通过。
That means catching suspects before they flee is key. Some criminal justice experts say that for that to happen, government agencies need to do less finger-pointing and more working hand in glove.
我们就看到有些人是大摇大摆坐飞机出去的，不是吗？机场也没有拦他，就出去了，对不对？如果是这样的一个状况，那不是也很瞎吗？横向连接的机制是有问题的嘛。
As for the nearly 8,000 that have skipped town, the government can only hope more talks with the countries where they're hiding will yield results, one case at a time. Howard Chang and John Van Triest for TaiwanPlus.
The Taipei Dome is set to begin its first trial runs in just a few weeks. The building has a long history with a controversial past. Leslie Lau takes a look at one of the main concerns about the building's opening.
The Taipei Dome is an indoor sports stadium that's been 30 years in the making. The venue will finally open its doors in November when it hosts 2 trial baseball games. Ahead of the trials, Taipei Mayor Chang let the media get their first look inside the dome. He's the 6th mayor to oversee the project, but he'll be the one to finally launch it. Planning for a dome began in 1991 when a baseball game got rained out.
一场突如其来的大雨，让当时中华职棒冠军战的赛程打乱，也引起现场上万的观众在雨中大声呼喊：“我们要去蛋，我们要去蛋。”
After a long planning and bidding process, construction of the Taipei Dome began in 2011 and was originally slated to open in 2016. But a number of delays dragged things out as there were concerns over safety and overcrowding. The Taipei Dome complex is located in a busy part of central Taipei, and the sports stadium is just one part of the development project. The grounds around the dome include a shopping mall, a movie theater, a hotel, and an office building. The dome itself has a capacity of 40,000 people, about twice that of New York's Madison Square Garden. So there's concern about vacating the area after events and, more importantly, emergencies. It's an issue that the mayor says has been addressed.
基本上相关的改善我们都已经完成。
And the dome's construction company says even in a packed stadium, people can evacuate within 15 minutes.
我们在经过15分钟之后就可以到这个安全的港口。我们刚才模拟它可以到一个就是安全的平台啦。
The dome is right next to a metro station, which seems convenient, but some experts believe that it creates more problems than it solves.
我们的捷运站设计并不是为了这么大的一个人流。那你如果捷运站跟这个像大巨蛋等等，它有一个适当的距离的时候，那在这个疏散的过程，那就会把这个空间就把它拉开。
Taipei City has approved the dome for use, meaning it has passed safety inspections. It's been 30 years, but Taipei citizens will soon be able to see whether it was worth the wait. Justin Wu and Leslie Liao for TaiwanPlus.
TSMC has the green light to start a new joint venture fab in the German city of Dresden. Taiwan's economy ministry has approved this project, saying there is no risk of cutting-edge technology leaking to other countries. The Dresden plant will make wafers using older techniques. TSMC will put about $3.7 billion into this project, and it's going to hold a 70% stake. Construction should start next year, with production starting by late 2027. What's it like to live inside one of Taiwan's most iconic historic landmarks? Today, in the final episode of Where's the Tainan Taking Us?, Andrew Ryan gets a tour of a centuries-old settlement for someone who used to live there.
When it comes to old buildings, Tainan has a lot of them. Take this building, for example, the Hayashi department store, which opened its doors in 1932 during the Japanese colonial period. It's the second oldest department store in all of Taiwan, but it's the oldest one still in operation. This grand old store contains the first elevator in southern Taiwan. And if you take it up to the rooftop, you'll find the country's only Shinto shrine located in a department store. These walls have borne witness to history. You'll find bullet holes that date back to World War II. One of the best ways to experience old Tainan is to stay in a building that's been renovated as a guest house. Wooden window frames, terrazzo floors, and old-fashioned stone bathtubs like this one. These used to be fixtures in almost every household in Taiwan. Today, they're prized reminders of the past and the reason why many people choose to stay in Tainan's retro guest houses.
可以去细细体会，就是从前的设计的这个空间。那透过住宿的话，你可以感受当时住在这里的人是怎么样生活。
Another place that blends old and new is the National Museum of Taiwan Literature. The building was once a seat of government, and now it celebrates the written word. Interactive displays bring literature to life. You can have your fortune told, experience poetry in creative ways, and even imagine what kind of book you might like to write. Most cities are focused on the future, but clearly, Taiwan's oldest city also has an eye on the past.
台南从1624年到2024年，明年就要进入400年。哇！所以我们很多文化的底蕴，很多文化的古迹，都在这边。
The last stop in our trip to Tainan is the place where it all began, Fort Zeelandia. The Dutch military built this defensive stronghold in 1624. It changed hands many times over the years and was eventually rebuilt and renamed Anping Old Fort. The observation tower was built by the Japanese. It's become a landmark offering a bird's-eye view of Anping. Local historian Lin Qitian says that visitors often overlook the most historic part of the old fort.
最有风味的就是要看这个墙壁了啊！这墙壁到现在是400年了。
Overgrown by banyan trees, this brick wall is the only evidence of Dutch history left inside the fort. Lin knows this area like the back of his hand. He lived inside the grounds as a child when his father served as Anping District Chief in the 1940s.
我曾经在那个楼层上面啊，那个地方有那个阶梯，躺在那个地方看天空。 发现那个北斗七星，哇，心胸就很开阔。那个开放式的空间对我们安平人来讲， 就是呢非常亲近，他们都可以到这边来玩。
Today, the place where Lin once lived is now a gift shop, but remnants of the old fort can still be found scattered throughout the neighborhood. A narrow alley leads us to the back of a temple where an ancient fort wall stands quietly. And it's easy to miss the remains of this 400-year-old gate standing next to modern houses.
In most places in Taiwan, it's difficult to find any traces of history. But here in Tainan, there are historic sites almost everywhere you turn. And they aren't just dusty old monuments. The people of Tainan have found creative ways of actually using them, of infusing them with vitality and incorporating them right into daily life.
While the old buildings of Tainan are worth celebrating, the real treasures are its residents. The artisans passing on the city's traditions, the people helping visitors experience the city's past, and the storytellers keeping the city and its memories alive. Scott Wang, Justin Wu, Peachy Zhuang, and Andrew Ryan for TaiwanPlus.
You can find more episodes in this series on our website at TaiwanPlus.com. Thanks again for tuning in to Taiwan Plus News. If you want to see more of our news reports on the go, follow us on X, Facebook, or YouTube. Finally, check out this exhibition about the evolution of the fantasy genre at London's British Library. This stuff is my jam. I'm Rik Glauert. Have a great weekend.